Okay,
Can you hear
so
me now? Can you hear
now
me?
everything works perfectly. Just 15 minutes late, but everything so we can start again.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, look, good things take time. But hey, look, in the meantime, I actually put together a little presentation, if you don't mind, maybe to get this started. We did say that I did not want to do a presentation because we just have a discussion. But now I was thinking maybe to get started, I have like 15 minutes or so. Is that okay or not?
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Okay. How
It,
much time do we have overall? It's now 5:25. Do we have until 7 o'clock, or how long do we have?
yes, we formally we have until 7 o'clock.
Okay.
So, but feel free if you need to be shorter or
Yeah.
more,
Okay.
you feel free. But we have until 7 o'clock.
Okay, very good. So I also have until 7 o'clock, which is 10 o'clock in the morning here for me. So with this, good morning from the West Coast in California. I'm here in Palo Alto. And okay, let me share my little presentation here. Okay, so you can see this presentation, I guess. Is that right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. All right, let's get started. So, welcome to my guest lecture here in Automotive Law, lessons learned from the first robo-taxis and an outlook at what's next. And maybe first a little bit about an introduction. Professor Enrico already told you a little bit, or maybe you read about me, but just as a rundown. So I'm from northern Germany, from the Hamburg area. I'm German. I studied mechanical engineering at the Technische Universität in Braunschweig, which is very close to Volkswagen headquarters, where I also did my master thesis. Then I moved to Munich to BMW, where I did my PhD work and started my professional career in 1995. And through BMW, I was sent to the US West Coast, to Silicon Valley, in 2003 to basically look at trends and technology innovation, what is in the Silicon Valley environment, what makes future vehicles safer, more efficient, more enjoyable, more usable. And from there, I moved on with BMW to Michigan, where we developed hybrid powertrains together with General Motors, Daimler, and Chrysler. And then in 2008, I moved to Stanford University. So this is when I moved on from BMW to Stanford University for 6 years as full time. So this was 2008 until early 2015. And when we launched the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford, where I also met Professor Bryant Walker Smith, who you mentioned in your introduction. And we worked together on legal aspects of automated vehicles, which really was a very strong component of this program here. Um, and from Stanford, I was then hired to McKinsey, the large consulting firm that probably some of you know, where I looked at all these mobility topics such as automation, connectivity, electrification, and sharing. And now, for about 7 years, actually, I'm an independent consultant where I still cover automated driving and other mobility topics. And I still lecture at the Stanford Business School. And I'm now also having a adjunct professor appointment at the university in Borås, which is in Sweden. So at a Swedish university, I teach classes now as well and conduct research. Those of you who prefer pictures, so this is me. I started my interest in automobiles very early on. Those of you who know this vehicle here can tell that for me, it does not need to have a lot of horsepower, or it doesn't need to be a race car necessarily so that I get interested in it. It's really for me about how do we transport people and make this a journey as opposed to just a task. That's what I'm really interested in. But I don't claim that all the questions have been answered, so which is why I enjoy interactions such as with the class here today, so that hopefully I will learn from you as well. So much about this introduction. If you can quickly confirm, is the sound okay? Can you hear me and follow my slides?
Yes, yes, everything
Okay,
works perfectly.
good.
Thank you.
Then I shall continue. So look, let's talk a little bit about my experience from those robotaxis. So I tried Waymo and Cruise quite a bit, and what I have here, I want to tell you a little bit more about. Um, so Cruise obviously does not operate anymore to the same extent in the city of San Francisco, but over the last year, so 2023, I had a lot of opportunity to try out Cruise as well, and Waymo still. And when I go to San Francisco, I get to use them quite a bit. So here are some experiences that I took from last year. And so what was really interesting that in the beginning, so this was relatively early on here, that Waymo was only open to close members of their work, so employees and some early riders. It operated from the beginning in all of San Francisco, but pickup was in the beginning and still is somewhat limited. So sometimes you need to walk for 2 blocks. It drove very, very well from the beginning when I tried it out. So this was about a year ago already. It drove very, very well. Not aggressive, but really that you have the feeling it knows what it's doing. And especially like merging into traffic. So like, and I will have this on the next slide, what this means from changing from one lane into the next and getting into the flow of traffic worked very well. Behaves like a human driver in a good way, because you can also behave like a human driver in a bad way, but it was really in a good way. And basically at the same speed as other vehicles. At that point, it did not go on highways. It took longer than an Uber, little bit more time that you need to take for the journey. It shows up also within 3 or 5 minutes, so that was fine. But it takes a little bit longer for the trip, but costs about the same. Now with Cruise, from the very beginning, it was basically open to almost everybody. You needed to register, but then you could just use it. In the beginning, at that time, about a year ago, it was only in selected parts of the city and only at night, which changes then over summer of last year. But here you can see the difference. Waymo limited availability to people, but all of the city, whereas Cruise limited availability in the city, but open to everybody. So that was very interesting. And also the pickup, where you could get into the vehicle, was almost everywhere with Cruise, whereas for Waymo, you needed to walk maybe. In my view back then, it was rather careful, which is good maybe if you don't really know what you're doing, but it almost felt a little bit hesitant at times and was moving over a little bit when it suggested that there might be something. So that I thought was not as assertive, as solid as a Waymo, I should say. Um, it really seemed to avoid some challenging areas as well, where you saw it was a straight line on the road, but it took like a little detour into the neighborhood street and then back on the main road, which I wondered, why is this happening now? But maybe it was avoiding some sections where it was not quite sure. Where Waymo behaved really like a human driver in a good way. Cruise felt more like a robot. Again, sometimes it felt a little bit too careful. When it was slowing down, you didn't expect this. Um, it drove slower than other vehicles. You could tell where the speed limit was 35 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour in the middle of the night. It went more like 25 or 30 miles per hour. So I was surprised by this. Both avoid the highway. Actually, we're not allowed, I think, on highways. And also, this took longer than an Uber, but cost about the same. So some of the okay. Really, my verdict overall in the end was Waymo appeared more assertive, so more solid, more like I know what I'm doing. But on the other hand, you need to say that these two concepts should not be compared directly because at that point they were not really the same ODD regarding time of day and so on. Later on in the year, in the fall, in October, shortly before they Cruise stopped their operations. Shortly before that, I still tried it. They were closer together, you can say, so that Cruise went a little bit faster. At some point, you almost had the feeling, ooh, maybe you should be a little bit more careful. So this part here, really you can tell that the software was progressing and what felt a little bit too careful in the beginning probably got fine-tuned, that you as a user thought, oh, maybe we should be a little bit more careful. So that was really, really interesting to watch, where we say very often, well, it's just a robot vehicle, they are all the same. No, they were not all the same. And also, when I had visitors from Europe and I took them in the car, they immediately said, no, this is a different driving style. And sometimes it really is, which one do you personally prefer? But the takeaway here is just because it's a robot taxi, that doesn't mean they are all the same. All right, so two examples where I was really impressed. Those of you who maybe know San Francisco, we are going here into Golden Gate Park, and we have here a little intersection that looks like this. So basically, this is the main road here that does not have a stop sign, and the Waymo vehicle comes from here and has a stop sign. Now, here's a lot of traffic. So basically, if you have the stop sign, you would wait there forever because they have the right of way. And you need to wait until everybody else is gone. But the Waymo vehicle did really a great job moving slowly forward, and then a gap opened up from these human drivers, and then the Waymo merged into this, a situation where really among experts we had discussed a lot what happens in the stopway situations, but the Waymo did this very, very well. Another situation, those of you again who know San Francisco, there's the 19th Avenue, which is technically Highway 1 in San Francisco. It's a terrible street. There are a lot of lanes in both direction. In the segment that we are going to look at here near Lake Park, it's 3 or 4 lanes in either direction. And the Waymo is here on the leftmost lane going down to the south. And then it figures, oh, this is the turning lane that would need to turn left somewhat over here. But I want to go straight. So probably all of you who drive a vehicle have been in this situation. Oh, I'm in the wrong lane. I need to do something. But there are vehicles coming here, and there's like a relatively big truck coming here. It really worked very well that the Waymo, of course, put out the turn signal, moved over a little bit to show through the motion also that this is really what it wants to do. And then the truck basically slowed down the vehicle here slowed down and Waymo was able to merge into this lane. So something where I had thought this is really difficult to do. And if you just pre-program something, that means this vehicle will sit there until the end of the day when there's no traffic anymore. And finally, it will be able to do the lane change because it needs to rely on the goodwill of other vehicles. And the good news is goodwill seems to exist, even in traffic in San Francisco, and that people move over there. Now, you will tell me, and we can discuss later on, if that works the same in Bologna or Rome or Catania, where traffic is probably a little bit different from traffic in San Francisco. So we certainly need to consider culture and temper and energy and communication preferences, how people organize traffic. But here it worked very well that the Waymo got in there. So my assessment in the end is that really those vehicles have changed my understanding of what is possible regarding automated driving. Until then, I basically used to say, I don't know, you can pre-program a vehicle, you can show a great demo, but that this works in real traffic, I don't know. I used to be called, therefore, a pessimist regarding level 4 automated driving. But since then, when I basically tell people exactly what I told you just now, they call me an optimist or a naive optimist who doesn't understand how difficult it is. I then asked these people back, so have you tried it? Oh, no, I have not tried it because I don't need to. I know that it's so difficult. I said, well, then maybe we don't need to discuss any further because I used to be called a pessimist, but now you call me a naive optimist. So what's going on here? And really, for me, the glass used to be half empty. Like, well, this will never work. Especially as a German automotive engineer, I used to say this and this and this and this. How do you do this? They did really, really well changing that and providing amazing performance. So, but there's still a big question, and that is about the business model, especially because I saw that the pricing is about the same as an Uber. Some people say, okay, it costs the same as an Uber, but you don't need to pay a tip. You don't need to pay your 15 or 20% on top that you give to the driver. But still, it's not really sure if the business model is there and sure if it scales, because there's still a lot of humans monitoring the rides. And it's good. During every ride, basically, that I had, there was always a message sometime during the ride. We just want to let you know right now there's a human monitoring the driving and might assist. So that is something which is good because some of these situations like the merging were tricky. But still, it means you need humans that also the 50% of what we pay for an Uber, 50% of the price for an Uber goes to the driver. We cannot just save these 50%. How do you scale these operations? I think it does require some connectivity, vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to anything communication. When you think about this merging that I showed you, that basically works because they're human drivers. The human drivers who even waved at the Waymo, okay, you can go now, which the Waymo doesn't really understand. But there are humans in there who say, okay, we create an opening so that this vehicle can merge. If all robot vehicles just operate according to the rule, it will not work. And this is what we see pretty often when you look up these news, and maybe you saw some of those, where like 6, 8 Waymo vehicles, they got stuck We saw this with cruise pretty often, that up to 10 or 12 cruise vehicles all came to the same intersection, then they got stuck because they cannot talk to one another. They cannot talk like, okay, we are 8 vehicles that are stuck. 7 of us, we stay and 1 goes backwards. They cannot communicate. Of course, you can implement this to a cruise or Waymo vehicles that they communicate with one another, but it also requires that a Waymo can talk to a cruise vehicle and the other way around. Same as someone in a Fiat can communicate with someone in an Audi. Okay, you stop, I go. Okay, you can go first. That you show with a sign of hand. So this needs to be implemented to really scale this up, that the entire city can work like this. And mapping a new city is actually quite an immense and costly undertaking. So this is where we shall see how quickly you can scale this. Which gets me, so again, I think it works very well, but the business model, I think, is not there yet. But what is the next step? So for Waymo, it's actually an extension to the highway and to my hometown where I'm calling from right now. I'm here in Palo Alto down there. And this is the extension that they got now approved. They used to be up here in San Francisco, but now they can do all this, including highways. So what you see here, this is from the California Department of Motor Vehicles, which now got confirmed by the California Public Utility Commission. So there are these 2 regulatory bodies that oversee what is possible. And they say, okay, you can now go on freeways, any way you want to go on. And you can go up to 65 miles per hour, where until then it was limited to 35 when I tried it. And you can even go in rain and fog. You can do all times, day and night, and you can use it for whoever you want. This is a huge extension that now they are allowed to go wherever they want between San Francisco and San Jose down here, which is about 80 kilometers. So that's I don't know if that's from Bologna to Milan or something like that. But it's really many cities. It's many roads, and it is something where we need to say this is way beyond a science experiment. I mean, San Francisco was way more than a science experiment, but this is like a real service. So that's next. And the other thing that's next, this was just last week, actually, well, actually just 2 days ago, in TechCrunch, which I follow quite a bit for news. It's now the question, who should control robotaxis playing out in California? It's really that now the regulators see what is happening. With Waymo, it works pretty well. There are still problems, but it works pretty well. With Cruise, it did not go very well. Zoox is another company that you might be familiar with, and they are going for robotaxi. We need to see how well this might work once they scale up their operations. So now there's a lot of discussion how the state should regulate this. And that's maybe also what we can talk a little bit more about here. What about the state? What about on a national level? Maybe even what's on a municipal level. But really overall, let me go back to this here. I was really impressed. So the glass is half full, and I think it's getting more and more filled up, that it is on a way to perfection, I would say. With this little bit of an introduction, I hope it was helpful and will be the basis for a good discussion. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was, as usual, impressive and also full of many things to discuss and very interesting problem to discuss. So I start giving the word to our students, which in the meantime have increased their number, and also to Matteo, but I also have a lot of questions. So if somebody likes to ask something, yeah, do you like to come here? Perhaps it's better so you can see better.
Yeah, you need to be close to the microphone, or if you want to repeat the question, or if the person can come to the microphone, that would
Perfect.
be helpful. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
First of all, it was a great presentation. I would like to ask if there were any car crashes recorded with Waymo or the Cruise, and if
Yes.
there were crashes, how did they resolve it?
Yeah. So yes, there are crashes. I don't have the numbers, but it's relatively transparent because every incident, not just a crash. So even if there's like a major system shut off, that needs to be reported because the cities, the regulator, and also on a California level, they want to know what is happening here. And there were several minor crashes. In the beginning, it was a lot that other vehicles were crashing into the Waymo or into the Cruise. Yeah. So where basically these vehicles were going a little bit slower, and they really come to a full stop at a stop sign, and they turn a little bit more carefully. And they are normal drivers who are rushing. They are like, I need to go there, I need to go there. So they crash into those vehicles. So that happened. It also happened that a Waymo, for instance, crashed into a cyclist, a person on a bicycle. And that was because there was the Waymo, the cyclist was behind a truck, and then turned in front of the Waymo into the other street. But the Waymo had the right of way. It could not see the cyclist as well as it should have been because it was behind the truck, but it was the mistake, the fault of the cyclist. And with Cruise, for instance, there was an incident where another vehicle with a human driver crashed into a pedestrian. The pedestrian flew through the air, landed in front of the Cruise. The Cruise per vehicle hit the, yeah. And then this was the incident that then ended up why Cruise stopped operation. The person then was under the Cruise vehicle. It's very tragic. The person did not die. The person was taken to hospital. It is not known how serious the injury were, but it doesn't seem to be the big problem, the injury. It's tragic enough. But there was an accident where a Cruise could not avoid, like this person that was hit already by another car. And so that was another incident. And there are a few more, but the statistics that we have at this point seem to indicate there are fewer accidents with Waymo and Cruise than with normal vehicles. So that tells you traffic is dangerous, but there seems to be indication that it's less dangerous with these vehicles. Okay?
Yeah, one more question before you
Yeah,
go.
sure, of course.
If the vehicle couldn't detect the cyclist, can it also not detect animals that are just jumping onto roads and stuff?
They can. And to be clear, the vehicles can detect cyclists. Otherwise, they would not be allowed on the road. But here it was a cyclist that was hidden behind a truck. And then the cyclist behaved against the law, like cutting in front of the Waymo. All of a sudden, you see it, and then it's already in front of you. But these vehicles can absolutely detect cyclists. And I say this, I'm a cyclist myself, so I'm very, very careful about this. And they can also detect animals. It works relatively well with LiDAR and camera. To some extent, some of these vehicles even have thermal cameras, infrared, that detects the temperature, and the temperature of an animal is higher than the environment. So they actually detect animals pretty well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you. Other question from students or researcher, or one from me. I try now. Many things are interesting, but I want to start from this. I perceive that there is a sort of gap of communication, or we can say something which makes the communication and the perception not uniform. I try to explain this. So the automated car can detect everything and can comply at best with the environment on the one hand, but on the other hand, the other drivers are human, and so they can comply with the rules with a low level of efficiency. And there is another problem, which was the problem of the cyclist, because in Italy, for example, but I think the same all over the world, the cyclists and mostly the pedestrians are not trained for the circulation. So there is a paradox, because on the one hand they are the weaker user of the road and many rules are designed to protect them, but on the other hand the system do not enough in order to make them in the position to do their best in order to exploit this protection. So the question is, in general, when we live in a traditional environment, we have a gap of knowledge, because nobody in Italy, for example, there is nobody which is seriously committed in making every baby, every pedestrian, every cyclist in the best position to comply with the rules which are designed to protect him. And so
Yeah.
this is the first problem which affects every country in the world, even if in a traditional scenario. But mostly, if we have in the future more and more cars which are so safe, so capable to protect us with the automation, on the other hand, we do not enough in order to make the weaker user of the road ready to exploit all the potential of this system. And the idea which you have enlightened before, the cyclist which was against the law, is exactly the representation of this. So the question is, what do you think is useful in a future perspective to do to solve this problem?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very, very important point that you are making. And so the quick answer to this is we need to realize that traffic as such is not a static system. I mean, for one, traffic obviously is a lot about dynamic, that vehicles move and everything. So certainly that is not static. But what I mean is like how traffic works and what we define as normal is not static. So that continuously evolves, which is also what we see, that the traffic rules, for instance, are evolving. One example, obviously, is like the use of cell phones in a car. Before cell phones, there was no regulation, obviously, about using a cell phone in a car. And now there is. And with vehicles of higher level of automation, it might be reconsidered if you can use these devices in the vehicle again. So, and similar to this, it is also something with automated vehicles. that also I, as a cyclist, and my last name is BEIKER, so therefore, you know, I am a cyclist. So I ride my bicycle because I'm a biker. That I need to understand that there are new kind of vehicles on the road. There should be a representation from me as well that is part of the discussion. That is, for instance, an interest group of cyclists that say these vehicles mean this to cyclists. How do we change the rule? The rule for these vehicles, robotaxis, also the rules for cyclists. You know, for instance, another example, so there's cell phones, but another example is all these scooters. All of a sudden, we have all these electric scooters in the cities, way too many, so that Paris already said, we don't want these scooters anymore. Then you get these questions, can you have an electric scooter on the sidewalk, on the pedestrian walk or not? Because it's just a small scooter, and the scooter was always fine because it was for kids on the sidewalk. But now that it's an electric scooter that goes at 20 kilometers per hour, that's maybe too fast on the sidewalk. So we really need to understand that traffic then also changes, and that happens on different levels. It starts at a city level, where in the city they say we allow robotaxi, yes or no. We allow robotaxi only at night or during the day. We allow a robotaxi in this part of the city, but not in that part of the city. So this is where it starts. It goes then to a regional level, which is a state here in California, where they regulate this, and then certainly on a national level, if not on an international level, because what good is it if you have maybe a self-driving truck that goes from Bologna to Frankfurt, goes through at least 3 countries, and they all need to be harmonized. If they go through Switzerland, that's not part of the European Union. So you need to figure this out. Again, it's a very long answer, but the important part was what I said briefly in the beginning. Traffic is not a static system. All of us need to learn what this means. And the regulation needs to make sure that all road users are safe, including and maybe in particular those who cannot see, those who are blind. They don't know if someone is in the car or not. They don't see if there's a light on the vehicle that maybe says I'm a self-driving car. They don't see there's a big W for Waymo on it. So all this we need to figure out, as traffic is not a static system.
Yes, yes, this is very interesting, and this is also the reason why I was impressed by the first thing you underlined. So, the idea to rely on the good faith or the goodwill of the other person, but also we can say on the tolerance of the other person.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
this is very impressive because I try to understand that these Waymo taxi are capable to adapt their conduct to also in some ways, the tolerance of other person in the street, which goes low in order to allow him to merge inside. And
Yeah.
this is typical of the human driver. So the idea is perhaps over time they can learn something from the environment in which they are, and so they can adapt over time themselves to this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. So that is very true. The challenge with this is, and the tragic part, that very often we, which means society, engineers, and regulators, learn through negative events. There's an accident, we fix it. because there's no absolute safety. Nothing is 100% safe. Not a nuclear power plant. We learned in Fukushima in Japan like 12 years ago that sometimes there are waves that are so high that even this nuclear atomic power plant poof. In traffic that we see, we put every safety that we could envision on these vehicles, but then there's a cyclist who doesn't behave like they should. And we learn through tragedy, and that is an ethical discussion, of course. Um, how do we deal with this?
This is very interesting because there is another thing very common in Europe. Now we are approving the regulation on the artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
and this we have a concept that can be particularly useful to discuss the problem we are discussing today, because they are talking about the control experimentation. So it means, on the one hand, I allow you to test something, but on the other hand, this test is developed through a monitoring, a constant monitoring, a constant attention, and also, I add one thing which I'm curious to ask, a special regime of liability. So
Mhm.
the idea is you are free to do this experiment, but there is a special regime of liability because we are in some ways willing to go ahead, and we do not want to hamper the progress on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have to be absolutely sure about the fact that in case of accident, any victim can be compensated without searching the fault or the defect. And so even if some accident happened and we are not completely sure about what was wrong, but in any case, you are safe and compensated. So this is the question, if there is a similar approach in California or in other situation in which this experimentation goes on.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some mechanisms that are put forth regarding liability and also a minimum bond that these companies need to have. So basically, that there's a financial mechanism that is reserved if something happens, that compensation is ensured. That's this. But the question then in the end is, when do you find a company liable for what happened? When do you decide they have to compensate the victim? And therefore, let's take this example with Cruise, which in the end led to the suspension, the stop of cruise service. And that was there was a human-driven car that hit the pedestrian. By the way, the pedestrian walked a red light, so the pedestrian went against the law. The human-driven car hit that pedestrian. I don't know if that was avoidable or not, but that happened. The bad thing, of course, was the human driver went on. That person was never found. Then that person went flying in front of the cruise. The cruise vehicle couldn't stop and went over that person. That's terrible. But then the problem was that the cruise vehicle had stopped but did not see the human because the human was under the vehicle. So the vehicle continued for about 6 meters to get to the side of the road. And the the pedestrian was still under the vehicle. That was not good, certainly tragic, painful. And then all of this was not necessarily said that this was the fault of the cruise vehicle. What led in the end to the stop of the service, that California said, no, Cruise, you have to stop, was that Cruise did not share. They did not share all the video recording from the onboard cameras as much as they had available. They only gave this, but they had much more. And that in the end, where the regulator said, look, you should have shared all the information with us, but you were holding something back. We don't trust you. You have to stop. Now, all of this, the whole case, and you can read this up, it's relatively well documented. If you look up, I think, October 2nd, cruise, San Francisco, it happened on October 2nd, you will find it. It was not automatically just because the cruise vehicle hit this pedestrian that automatically cruise was at fault, because it was unavoidable. The other car hit a person that was running a red light. And so with this, yes, there needs to be these mechanisms that they can pay a compensation, but still legal practitioners such as yourselves and your esteemed class, they will need to decide, was this avoidable? Was every precaution taken to not have this incident? How severe was it? And then if it's found guilty, yeah, they could have avoided it. Okay, then what is the fine? So in that sense, I don't think that the law changes, the punitive law or the tort law, that changes that much now that it's a human driver, other than you cannot sue an individual driver anymore. You have a large corporation probably. And within this large corporation, you need to see if it's the software developer or the sensor integrator or the corporation as an impersonal body. But this is why you're teaching this class. This is what we need to discuss.
Yes, yes, this is exactly what we are interested in. So, how the liability rules have to change in order to follow this new phenomenon.
Yeah.
And also, another very interesting thing that you notice is also the need of a wide harmonization of the standards and the rules. One reason is exactly what you told before. So if a truck has to go from Bologna to, for example, Munich or I don't know where,
Yeah.
but we need to have rules which allow this truck to make all its travel and
Yes.
comply with uniform standard.
Yes.
And on the other hand, I heard before that you, in your presentation, say that many standards have to be drafted. And so the question is if they are drafted at a federal level or a national level or a regional level, because it also depends on the wide extension in which the car can operate, because perhaps they can reach a limit in which they can physically work, but legally not. And so,
Yes, that's right. That's right. Absolutely. And you might want to go even higher than the national level. That's the international level. And this is where, since we last talked like a couple of years ago, I've started a new project, which is at UNECE. That is United Nations Economic Council for Europe. And it says Europe, but it's really global. And on that level, there are a lot of regulations now being developed on a United Nations level. There are a lot of regulations being developed, especially for automated driving. Because for one, it's understood that these vehicles will travel internationally, and you need to harmonize the law. But it's also understood that what is safe in one country is probably also safe in another country. Of course, traffic is different and you need to look at the details, but you want to make sure that it's not something, oh, the sensor we think is good enough, and you don't know enough about the other country where they said, oh, we have proof that that sensor is not good enough. Which means, for instance, you want to learn from these robotaxis in California, Arizona, and a lot actually in China. You want to learn from those so that once the robotaxi come to Bologna or Milan, that they are also safe. And this is what's being regulated on an international level, that they learn from all these, what I call science experiment, pilot implementations, and then commercial deployment. They learn from all of this on a UN level, and then they say, here's the regulation. This is what you need to comply with. And then the industry can say, okay, we comply with the United Nations regulation. That is the best we can do. If then something happens, the first question in court should be, did the product, the vehicle, the robotaxi, or the truck that goes to Munich, did this vehicle comply with this regulation? If that's no, that's a bad start. But hopefully it's a yes. It has to be a yes. Otherwise, the regulation goes, you don't get a permit. Then you got to see, was it good enough? And we see it all the time in the work that I do at the United Nations, that regulations get updated because we learn all the time.
Yes, in fact, in this, I think that the culture of constant monitoring is the element which, for us in the law, is the most precious element, because we
Yep.
come from a tradition in which we design a law and we wait for decades before it is outdated. Now we have a new approach which uses the constant monitoring in order to make the law constantly updated. This is
Yeah.
very interesting because during previous meeting, for example, also this morning, we underlined the importance of engineer and more in monitoring in helping the legislator to update every day the law.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did not left enough space to the student because I was so curious, and so now I give again them
Please
the
do.
floor in order to have new questions coming from the audience. Or also the audience, which is, because we are now in a blind in a blended mode, and so
Yeah.
somebody is following. So if somebody is curious outside the physical class, you have the floor.
Don't be shy.
Okay, we have one person in the class, so she's coming.
Good. Good, good.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. And second, do you think that they can compete, RoboTaxis can compete just on price in order to compete with Uber, or they have other competitive advantages?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's in the end the important question. Why are we doing this? And it depends probably who you ask. So let's say in the beginning, the reason why the industry and Google to a large extent got involved into self-driving cars, they said that was safety. Because there are so many people who die in traffic accidents or who get injured in traffic accidents. We have to do something. So in that sense, one motivation certainly is safety, and that you can claim these vehicles are safer because they are not like a human driver who is maybe tired, who's maybe distracted, maybe other reasons why they should not drive. And I would say, for especially for robotaxis, The motivation is to save money, because a human driver, of course, needs to get paid. And I personally think, of course, they have to get paid. It's a job, it's a business. We need to ask this question as a society: what if these jobs are not anymore? Not a taxi driver, not a delivery driver, not a truck driver. These might not be the most interesting jobs in the world, but they are jobs. People make a living out of those. But certainly for those robotaxis, I would say the motivation is to save on cost. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Important question. Why are we doing this?
Yes, this is extremely important because we also had the problem of the impact of this technology on the work market. And also, we also will discuss after the impact of the structure of the city, for example,
Yeah.
so many other things. But in the meantime, I leave the floor to Professor De Pamphilus, which is curious
Of course.
particular aspect. Thank you.
Please. Hello again.
Hello, thank you very much, first of all, for your speech.
You're welcome.
It was really interesting. And my question would be about data specifically, because I was really interested when you spoke about your experience on Waymo, and you said that it kind of stretched the rule. It was stretching the rules, so trying to behave as we would in a tricky situation. So relying also on the capability of other drivers to give space,
Yeah.
and so on, which is kind of a trade-off that we always do while driving. So accepting some risks and not complying perfectly with the rules. And probably the interesting thing about these new robotaxis will be that they will be full of data collected on the street. And so the experience that we have in court is that the more data you have, the easier it is to assess liability. So it is really interesting learning that cruise is not anymore on the market because of the refusal of sharing data.
Mm-hmm.
So my question was about, do you have any specific regulation about the sharing of data?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, you said that Waymo was stretching the rules. I think this is what you said. And let me say they get creative before they sit in one position forever. I did not see anything where they went over the law. I didn't see any of that. But they get creative, like instead of waiting, they move a little bit. They like, I want to, right? So and that's the only way, I think, to show that you are intended to move forward. So this is what they do well. But no breach of the law. I didn't see any breach of the law. Now, with the data, I think we have to separate two things. So one is the data that they generate, and the other is the data that they collect and store. Because these sensors generate so much data. It's so many gigabytes every minute or so. You can look up these numbers. Some say, I think, in the order of 4 terabyte a day or something like this. It's like an immense amount of data that they generate. But what do they store? Because much is like we as humans, our eyes and ears perceive a lot of information, but not everything gets stuck in the brain. So we also just pass through, because what happened at the last intersection is not of relevance anymore, except if something happened. And this is when the lawyers come in. Oh, you just passed by this intersection. Did you see that there was an accident? What do you remember? And this is the same, obviously, with a self-driving automobile. like what is in the camera, what is stored. And this is where we need regulation. And some of this exists with this, and what is it? EDR, an electronic data recorder, that exists here in the United States, in other countries as well. Already on a relatively low level, if you just have the velocity, the brakes, the accelerator pedal, the turn signal, you can tell already a lot of things. What was the driver doing before the collision? If you save like 30 seconds, 30 seconds before an airbag gets deployed, then you know already a lot from just these four signals: speed, a velocity, accelerator, and turn signal. And so that's now what we need to see for automated vehicles as well. How much of the camera data should be recorded and stored? And also in what resolution? Is it like every second? 1 second is not enough when you talk about vehicle dynamics. Is it every tenth of a second? So 10 frames every second? Is it 20 frames every second? Is it full color or not? If it's not color, you might not see, is that a brake light or was that like another light? So that's what you need to see and where we need regulation. I think now in a time where all these vehicles generate all the data, because otherwise they don't work, and that storage is relatively cheap, it's not a question anymore of if you can do it. The question then obviously is, should you do it? And then you get into GDPR and so on, that you might even need to talk about, okay, you see a person, but that person must not be identifiable. So you need to blur the face, that you cannot identify the face anymore. Maybe you need to blur the license plate so that you cannot track which vehicle was where at a certain time, which then obviously makes it difficult if you want to find out who was involved in an accident, where you can say, yes, there was a red Fiat Cinquecento. Oh, but you don't see the license plate. You cannot be sure that it was this Fiat Cinquecento. Maybe it was another one. So this is what we need to find out, but the possibilities are there. And now we are really getting in a situation where we need to define from a data privacy, also from a cybersecurity perspective, probably, how do we do this? And that's where I urge you to give out good problem statements for homework assignments and master thesis in your program.
Thank you again. And I don't know if there are other questions from the class. If there are not, just one question to close. There is always this question very intriguing. So the problem of the ethical problem. And so if in California something is under discussion about the so-called dramatic choices and what the car is supposed to do in these cases.
Yeah, so there's, for instance, this trolley problem that maybe was discussed in class already, but it basically goes, okay, there's like a trolley, like a small train that goes to a switch, to a fork, and it's supposed to go in this direction, and in this direction you're going to kill 5 people, 5. But if you get it in this direction, only one person is going to die. So both cases are bad, 1 or 5. But it's supposed to go in this direction. Should you pull the switch so it goes to this and you save 4 people? And there has not been, in my observation, a satisfying answer to this. And I've been discussing this many times with people, and I have always said, I don't know if this is a discussion that makes sense. Because if 5 or 1 person to kill is your only option in a road traffic, that means maybe you were going too fast. Because I learned in my driver's license, you should always be able to stop the vehicle in the distance how far you can look. Right? That's what I learned in traffic school in northern Germany, what I showed you on my first slide. If you go at 50 kilometers per hour, you need about 10 to 15 meters to stop. So you need to be certain when you go at 50 kilometers per hour that within 10 to 15 meters, there's nothing that can happen. Otherwise, you go too fast. Okay. And then I had this discussion with many people. And then finally, someone who studied theological matters, philosophy, someone who studied philosophy, he said, Sven, you're an engineer, you're not understanding it. These are ethical questions. The purpose or the goal is not to find an answer. It's not the goal. It's an ethical question where you cannot really find an answer. The purpose is that we have this discussion, that we are aware of the problems, especially for engineers, that engineers understand you are developing a system that will need to make a decision. And that decision is a matter of life or death. You have to be aware of this. This is not just a decision if your automobile accelerates from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 10 seconds or 8 seconds. That's not a question if you can put 2 big suitcases in the trunk or just 1. As an engineer, you are now making a decision who might die. And this is why we need to get these ethical and philosophical education into engineering as well, certainly in law, but I think in law, ethics, and philosophy have been more included than it was in engineering. And that's what we need to have. And in the end, we need to be aware what our creations will cause. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this precious interview, precious consideration, and thank you again because it's always a pleasure to discuss this subject with you. So I think for now we can end this lesson and this we can say this chat, but obviously we hope to have this again in online
Yes.
mode or perhaps physically in Bologna. And for this, I tell you one thing. Next week, Brian will be here.
Yeah.
If it is compatible with your time in California, perhaps we can also arrange
it would be very nice.
Connection. So
it would be very nice. Yes. Yes.
I will keep you updated about
Please
this.
do, Enrico. Please do. Okay.
Thank you, and goodbye also by the class, which
Bye-bye.
I going to see.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much for everything. It was a pleasure. Bye. Bye.
Bye.